I stood in the kitchen, staring at the familiar mug in my hand. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Nina was still asleep upstairs, wrapped in the comfort of our shared bed. I should have felt at ease like any other morning, but I didn't. That nagging feeling, the one I'd carried for years, was there again, gnawing at the back of my mind. I took a slow sip of coffee, trying to shake it off, but the memories crept in, as they always did. 2 women, 2 girls from my youth, each one tearing a piece out of me. Emma and Rachel. Their names were enough to stir the old wounds. First, Emma, with her bright smile and sweet words, had promised me everything, only to fall into someone else's arms without a second thought. And then Rachel, a whirlwind romance that ended just as cruelly when I caught her in bed with another man. That's the thing about betrayal. It scars you in ways you don't realize at the time. It's like a shadow that never quite leaves, lurking behind every look, every word, every unexplained phone call. For years, I thought I'd moved past it. After all, Nina wasn't like them. She was different. We'd been together for a decade, built a life and trusted each other, right? But even after 10 years, those old scars hadn't completely healed. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something, some small detail that made my stomach churn. Nina's late nights, her sudden interest in her phone, the way she'd laugh with her coworkers in a way she never did with me anymore. I hated feeling like this. I hated the doubt that clung to me like a second skin. But once it crept in, it wouldn't let go. I took another sip of coffee, staring out the kitchen window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow across the backyard. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that these thoughts were just the ghosts of my past relationships. But that wasn't enough to silence the fear that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't imagining things this time. Footsteps broke my thoughts. Nina padded into the kitchen, her dark hair a tangled mess, a soft yawn escaping her lips. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. It wasn't her fault. She didn't deserve my mistrust, not yet anyway. She moved past me, grabbing her own mug and filling it with coffee. I watched her carefully, looking for any sign, any little hint, that my suspicions were unfounded. But she was just Nina, as she always had been. And that was the worst part. Because if I was wrong, I was dragging old wounds into a place where they didn't belong. But if I was right, if my gut wasn't just haunted by ghosts, then everything I'd built with her was standing on broken ground. "I'm meeting some friends from work later," Nina said casually as she leaned against the counter. "Nothing big, just a couple of drinks." My chest tightened for just a second, and I quickly pushed the feeling down. I wasn't going to ruin another morning with my paranoia. I wasn't going to let my past destroy my present. "Sounds good," I muttered, forcing my voice to stay calm. Nina glanced at me, a small smile on her lips. She kissed me on the cheek before heading back upstairs to get dressed. I stared into my coffee, that gnawing feeling still twisting inside me. Was I being paranoid? Or was this the beginning of something else? Later that evening, I found myself in a bar that was a little too noisy, a little too crowded for my liking. It wasn't my scene, never had been. I usually avoided nights out like this, preferring a quiet evening at home. But Nina had asked me to come, to meet her coworkers. She thought it would be good for me to get to know them better. Maybe it would help me feel less suspicious. Maybe it would calm that doubt that I was too ashamed to admit was festering inside me. The place was buzzing. Dim lighting, music thumping in the background, and the clink of glasses all around us. Nina was in her element, laughing and chatting with her colleagues. I hung back, nursing a beer, trying to engage but feeling like an outsider. I glanced around the table. There was a mix of faces, some I recognized from Nina's stories about work. Her friend Jess, always the joker. A few others I couldn't place. Then there was Mark, one of her closer male coworkers. I'd heard his name before, but seeing him now, seated next to Nina, laughing at some joke she made, something inside me twisted. I hated that it did. I hated that I was already counting how many drinks they'd had, wondering if the easy, playful banter between them was just that, banter. I reminded myself that I was here to relax, to enjoy the night. These were her friends, just friends. But then came the jokes. It was Jess, already tipsy and with that mischievous grin plastered on her face, who started it. "So, Nina," she teased, elbowing her from across the table, "are you going to tell Luke what you two were really doing during those late work nights? Or should we leave that a secret?" Nina laughed, maybe a little too loudly. Mark, sitting beside her, chuckled, but said nothing. My eyes darted between them, my stomach clenching. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, but feeling the tension starting to coil inside me. Jess waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, just office gossip. Those late nights Nina and Mark always seem to have. Must be fun working that hard together." She winked, and Nina rolled her eyes. "It's nothing, Luke," Nina said, her voice still wrapped in laughter. "Just a joke. We work late sometimes, that's all." I smiled back, forcing the muscles in my face to cooperate, but the pit in my stomach was growing. Nina brushed it off so easily, but I couldn't shake the image of her and Mark in some quiet office after hours, sharing more than just a work assignment. The thought came uninvited, and I hated it. "Yeah," Mark finally chimed in, his tone casual, but his eyes avoiding mine. "Nothing serious, man. Just a couple of projects keeping us late." My heart pounded in my chest, and I gripped the bottle in my hand a little tighter. It was just a joke. That's what I kept telling myself. But there was something in the way Nina laughed, the way Mark stayed quiet a second too long, that sent a chill down my spine. I forced myself to laugh it off too. "I trust her to keep things professional," I said, trying to sound confident, even though I wasn't sure if I was convincing anyone. The table erupted in laughter again, moving on to other topics, but I couldn't. I sat there, the clink of glasses and the hum of conversation buzzing in the background, while my thoughts spiraled. I was overreacting, wasn't I? Nina was right. It was just a joke. But why did it feel like there was something more behind it? Throughout the rest of the night, I tried to focus on the conversations around me, but my eyes kept drifting back to Nina. She was smiling, laughing, relaxed. I wanted to believe that was all there was to it. That she was just enjoying herself. No hidden agenda. No secret meaning behind those jokes. But every time Mark's hand rested on the back of her chair, or when they shared a quick glance, the knot in my chest tightened. I didn't want to be that guy. The one who couldn't let his wife have friends. The one who questioned every innocent interaction. But I couldn't help it. The old wounds, the scars from Emma and Rachel, were flaring up. And no matter how much I tried to push them down, they wouldn't stay buried. As the night dragged on, the noise of the bar seemed to fade into the background. I was caught in my own head, replaying the evening over and over again. The jokes, the glances, the little things that shouldn't matter but did. And through it all, Nina was right there, laughing as if nothing was wrong. I knew I'd have to talk to her about it later. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my past was clouding my judgment. But I needed to know, to clear the air before my thoughts drove me mad. As the group finally started to wind down, we said our goodbyes. Nina wrapped her arm around me, smiling, as we headed to the car. "You were quiet tonight," she said softly, glancing up at me as we walked. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I muttered, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." But inside, the doubt gnawed at me like a slow poison. We drove home in near silence. Nina was humming softly to herself, leaning against the window, probably thinking the night had gone off without a hitch. Meanwhile, my mind was a battlefield, emotions clashing, questions fighting for space in my head. I tried to play it cool, to not let it get to me. But the things Jess had said, Nina's reaction, Mark's presence, everything was buzzing in my ears. I parked the car in the driveway, turning off the engine. The air between us felt thick, like a wall had built up during the short ride home. Nina turned to me, still smiling faintly. "You sure you're okay? You've been acting off all night." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to ignore the gut-wrenching feeling inside me and pretend like the night had been fine. But I couldn't. The doubts, the nagging suspicions, they were too loud now. I needed to know. I started, then paused, unsure of how to bring it up. There was something about tonight, Nina. Something that didn't sit right with me. She blinked, her smile fading as she studied me more closely. What are you talking about? I took a breath, searching for the right words but finding none that didn't sound paranoid. That joke Jess made, about you and Mark. Nina's eyes widened in surprise, and then she let out a small, dismissive laugh. Luke? Seriously? It was just a joke. She's drunk, and she likes to tease everyone. You know that. I know, I said quickly, trying to steady myself. But it wasn't just Jess. It was the way you two looked at each other tonight. The way you laughed at the joke. Like it wasn't just a joke. Like maybe there's something more. Nina sighed, running a hand through her hair. You're being ridiculous. There's nothing between Mark and me. Nothing, Luke. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I countered, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Because it sure didn't seem like nothing. The late nights, the jokes, the way he acts around you. It doesn't feel like nothing to me. Nina stood up, pacing a little. This again? We've been through this before. You always get suspicious and it always leads back to this same conversation. You let your past get in your head, and now it's ruining us. I flinched at that, but I couldn't let it go. You didn't deny that you've been spending more time with him, I said quietly, my fists clenched by my sides. So are you? Nina stopped pacing and stared at me, her expression hardening. Luke, I work with him. Of course I spend time with him, but that's it. You need to stop letting your imagination run wild. There is nothing going on. Jess was making a joke and you're taking it way too seriously. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to keep my voice steady. It's not just the joke, it's everything lately. The phone calls, the texts, the late nights. You've been distant, Nina. You've been acting like there's something you're not telling me. She threw her hands up in frustration. I don't know what you want me to say, Luke. I've told you there's nothing going on. What more do you need? Do I need to quit my job? Stop talking to anyone who isn't you? The accusations stung, but I didn't back down. No, I just need you to be honest with me. If I'm being paranoid, tell me, but don't act like I'm imagining all of this. Nina's eyes narrowed. You are imagining it, and honestly, I'm sick of it. Sick of being questioned every time you feel insecure. You've been drinking, Luke. Maybe that's what this is, just you overthinking after a few beers. The accusation hit me hard, and for a moment I wasn't sure what to say. Maybe she was right. Maybe the drinks had made me exaggerate things in my head. But that didn't change the nagging feeling that something was off. Nina, I'm not trying to accuse you. I just need to understand. Because right now, I don't know what to think. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You don't know what to think because you don't trust me. And I can't keep doing this, Luke. I can't keep defending myself every time you get in your head about something. I wanted to argue, to explain that this wasn't just about me. It was about us. About how things had been changing, how she had been changing. But before I could say another word, she turned away, wiping her eyes. You know what? She said quietly. I'm done with this conversation. I don't need to explain myself anymore. I'm going to bed. She started to walk toward the stairs, her voice breaking as she continued. I can't keep proving myself to you when you refuse to believe me. If you don't trust me after 10 years, then I don't know what else to say. Before I could stop her, she disappeared up the stairs, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit living room, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. I sank onto the couch, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was letting my past betrayals cloud my judgment. I stared at the empty room around me, the silence deafening. Had I just accused the woman I loved of something she didn't do? Was I letting my paranoia destroy the one thing I had left? I buried my face in my hands, doubt crashing over me like a wave. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. Nina hadn't brought up the argument again, and neither had I. We were walking on eggshells, pretending everything was fine while the tension simmered beneath the surface. It was like waiting for a storm to break, both of us knowing it was coming, but neither wanting to be the one to set it off. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the doubts that kept creeping back into my mind. But every time my phone buzzed with a text from Nina, my heart would race. Every time she said she had to stay late, I'd feel that familiar pang in my gut. Was she really where she said she was? Or was I just falling into the same spiral of mistrust again? I tried to push it down, telling myself that I was the one in the wrong. That night at the bar, I had been drinking, and maybe Nina was right. Maybe my suspicions were nothing more than old wounds reopening. I couldn't let my past destroy what we had now. I wouldn't. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. "Hey, Luke, got a minute?" I looked up from my desk to see Oliver standing in the doorway. My best friend, someone I'd known since high school, was always laid back, always calm. But there was something different about him today. He looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet as if he wasn't sure he should be there. "Sure, man, what's up?" I leaned back in my chair, grateful for the distraction. Oliver stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Listen, I've been thinking about whether or not I should bring this up, but I don't think I can keep quiet about it anymore." My stomach dropped. I sat up straighter, my heart suddenly racing. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "It's about Nina and Mark." The world seemed to tilt for a second, my mind racing back to that night at the bar. The jokes, the glances, the way Nina had dismissed everything. I felt the knot tighten in my chest. "I saw something," Oliver continued, his voice quiet but firm. "That night at the bar, after you and I stepped outside for a few minutes. When I came back in, I saw Nina, with Mark." My throat tightened, but I managed to ask, "What do you mean you saw them?" Oliver shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room before finally landing on me. "They were close. Really close. And then, before I could really process what was happening, I saw them kiss. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me." I stood up, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. "What?" "No, you must have seen wrong. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was someone else." Oliver shook his head slowly. "I thought about that, Luke. Trust me, I didn't want to believe it either. But it was her. I'm sure of it." I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of that night. Nina laughing with Mark, the jokes Jess had made, the way Nina had brushed it all off like it was nothing. I had wanted to believe her. I had convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. But now, Oliver was telling me that my worst fear had been real. I wanted to argue with him, to tell him he was wrong, that he had misunderstood or that he was mistaken. But the look on his face, he was telling me the truth, and deep down, I knew it. "Luke," Oliver said gently, his voice breaking through my thoughts. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but I couldn't let it slide. You deserve to know." I sank back into my chair, my head spinning. I had wanted to believe that it was all in my head, that I had overreacted. But now it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "You're sure?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Oliver nodded solemnly. "I'm sure." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My mind was a whirl of confusion and anger. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. I wanted to pretend that Oliver had never come to me with this, that he had never seen what he did, but I couldn't. Finally, Oliver spoke again, his voice soft. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what to think. My thoughts were racing. Part of me wanted to rush home, confront Nina, demand to know the truth. But the other part of me, the part that was still reeling from the shock, just wanted to curl up and disappear. I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I don't know what to do." Oliver stood up, walking over to me and placing a hand on my shoulder. "Take your time, man. Just don't do anything rash, okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. The anger was building inside me like a storm waiting to break. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to cling to the hope that Oliver was wrong, that he had misunderstood. But deep down, I knew. I knew that Nina wasn't the same woman I thought she was. As Oliver left the office, I sat there, staring at the wall, my mind spinning. Every memory I had of Nina, every smile, every laugh, every late night, it all felt tainted now. I didn't know what to believe anymore. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't pretend this was nothing. The storm was coming, and I had to be ready for it. It had been a few days since Oliver dropped the bombshell on me, but I still hadn't confronted Nina. I didn't know how. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with. But Oliver's words echoed in my head, turning every glance, every smile, into something suspicious. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew was unraveling. I tried to act normal. Nina didn't seem to notice anything was wrong. If anything, she seemed relieved that we hadn't brought up the fight from the night at the bar. I almost convinced myself to let it go, to pretend nothing had happened. But I couldn't. Oliver's words weighed too heavily on me. He had seen Nina kiss Mark. He wasn't mistaken. He had no reason to lie. And that left me in a hellish limbo. I wanted to believe Nina. I wanted to believe that what we had wasn't crumbling beneath me. But I couldn't. Not anymore. That's why, on a Tuesday evening, instead of heading home from work, I found myself parked outside Nina's office. I didn't plan to be there. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to see her. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that Oliver was wrong, that there was nothing going on. But deep down, I knew why I was there. The minutes ticked by as I sat in my car, watching the entrance of the building. Employees filtered out in waves, first the early leavers, then the regulars. I recognized a few of Nina's co-workers from the bar. I watched each one, my heart pounding in my chest. Every time the door opened, my stomach twisted tighter. Finally, Nina emerged. She was laughing, her hand resting casually on the arm of the man walking beside her. My throat went dry. It was Mark. The same Mark from the bar. The same Mark from Oliver's confession. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. It was an innocent scene. Two co-workers leaving work, sharing a joke, nothing more. But the way she looked at him, the way she laughed, it felt like someone had stabbed me in the chest. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. But then they stopped by her car, and she hugged him. It wasn't the kind of hug you give a coworker after a long day. It lingered, her arms wrapped around him just a little too tight, just a little too long. When she pulled away, I could see her smiling, even from where I sat. Mark said something and she laughed again, swatting him on the arm like they shared some private joke. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. This was real. This wasn't in my head. They didn't kiss, not this time, but it didn't matter. The way she looked at him, the way she touched him, it told me everything I needed to know. Nina wasn't just some innocent bystander in this. She was part of it. Maybe it hadn't started with malicious intent, but it was happening now. I couldn't sit there any longer. I couldn't watch her walk away from me, walk into the arms of someone else. Without thinking, I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, the horn blaring in the quiet parking lot. Both of them looked up, startled. Nina's eyes found mine, and for a moment she froze. Her face drained of color. Mark looked between us, confused, but Nina knew exactly what was happening. She knew. She quickly said something to Mark, too far away for me to hear, then hurried over to my car. I rolled the window down as she approached, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Luke," she said, her voice high-pitched with surprise or maybe fear. "What are you doing here?" I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and hurt. "I should ask you the same thing." She glanced back at Mark, who was still standing by her car, looking awkward and unsure of what to do. "Luke, it's not what it looks like." I clenched my teeth. "Then what is it, Nina? Because it looks like you're awfully close with someone you keep telling me is just a coworker." Her eyes flicked nervously between me and Mark. "We were just leaving work. I was saying goodbye." "Goodbye?" I repeated, my voice hard. "That's not how you say goodbye to someone at work. That's how you say goodbye to someone you've been—" I trailed off, unable to say the words. They were caught in my throat, suffocating me. The truth was staring me in the face, but I still couldn't bring myself to fully accept it. Nina looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Luke, please, can we talk about this at home? Not here." I shook my head, the rage simmering just below the surface. "No, Nina. I want answers now. What the hell is going on?" She took a deep breath, but before she could answer, Mark started walking over. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice calm, but his presence only made my anger flare hotter. I stepped out of the car, squaring my shoulders. "This doesn't concern you, Mark." He stopped in his tracks, hands raised in a defensive gesture. "Hey man, I don't want any trouble." "You've already caused enough," I shot back, turning my attention back to Nina. "So? What is it? Are you going to tell me the truth, or are you going to keep pretending?" Nina's eyes welled with tears, and for the first time, she looked genuinely scared. "Please, Luke, let's go home and talk. Not here, not now." I wanted to push, to force her to tell me everything right then and there. But the tears in her eyes, the fear on her face, it stopped me. This wasn't the place. Not in front of Mark, not in a parking lot. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. "Fine, we'll talk at home, but this isn't over." Nina nodded, wiping at her eyes. She hurried back to her car, avoiding Mark's gaze as she got inside. He glanced at me one more time, an apologetic look on his face, before heading to his own car. I watched them both drive away, my fists clenched at my sides, the fury inside me barely contained. Whatever happened tonight, whatever Nina told me when we got home, I knew one thing for sure. Everything was about to change. The drive home was unbearable. Nina stayed silent, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the leather. I watched her, every muscle in my body coiled tight with anger and suspicion. I wanted to demand answers right there in the car, but something told me that whatever came next needed to happen in private. When we pulled into the driveway, she parked the car and sat there for a moment, her eyes fixed on the dashboard, as though she could avoid facing the reality of what was about to happen. I opened the door without a word and stepped out. The air felt heavy, thick with the tension hanging between us. Nina followed me into the house, her footsteps quiet behind me. I walked into the living room, every nerve in my body tingling with anticipation. My heart was pounding so loud in my chest that it drowned out the silence of the house. She stood near the door, arms wrapped around herself, eyes cast downward. It was as if she was trying to disappear into the background, hoping I wouldn't press her for the truth. But that wasn't going to happen. I turned to her, my voice low but sharp. "I want you to tell me what's going on, Nina. Right now." She flinched at the directness in my tone. She looked up at me, her eyes already brimming with tears. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stood there, trembling slightly, as if she were caught between confession and silence. "Nina," I said, my voice firmer now. "I saw the way you were with him. I'm not stupid. I need to know what's really happening. Don't lie to me." Her bottom lip quivered as she stared at me, the weight of her guilt finally breaking her silence. "It's not what you think, Luke," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I swear it's complicated." I could feel my chest tightening, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "Then explain it to me," I demanded. "What exactly is so complicated about what I saw? Are you seeing him? Is there something going on between you two?" Nina's eyes welled up, her tears spilling over. She shook her head slowly, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I froze. The room seemed to spin for a moment as her words hung in the air between us. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded in my ears, but I needed to hear her say it. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She wiped her eyes, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her secret was finally crushing her. "Mark and we kissed. That night at the bar. It wasn't just a joke, Luke. We kissed." My head spun, the world tilting beneath me. I had suspected something was going on, but hearing her admit it still hit like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The air seemed to grow thicker, suffocating me as the reality of her betrayal sunk in. "I'm so sorry," Nina continued, her voice breaking as she took a step closer to me. "It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. It shouldn't have happened, but..." I took a step back, raising my hand to stop her. "How long?" I asked, my voice rough with anger. She looked at me, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What? How long have you been seeing him? How long have you been lying to me?" Nina shook her head, wiping away the tears as they streamed down her face. "No, it wasn't like that. I'm not seeing him. It was just one kiss, Luke. I swear." My mind raced, images of them together flashing in my head. I didn't believe her, not completely. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I saw? After everything Oliver told me?" "It's not just one kiss, Nina. It's more than that." Her eyes widened at the mention of Oliver's name. "What did Oliver tell you?" I let out a bitter laugh, the anger finally bubbling to the surface. "He told me that he saw you two that night. He saw you kiss." I didn't want to believe it, Nina, but I can't ignore what's right in front of me anymore. Nina sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've messed everything up, but it was a mistake, Luke. I swear it didn't mean anything." The rage inside me boiled over. "Didn't mean anything? You're telling me that you've been sneaking around, kissing another man, and it didn't mean anything?" I could feel my hands shaking, my vision blurring with fury. "How long has this been going on?" Nina dropped her hands, her eyes wide with panic. "Luke, please." I stepped closer, my voice low but seething. "How long?" She hesitated, her breath hitching as she struggled to find the words. "Maybe a week or two," she whispered, her voice breaking again as she started crying harder. It was like everything inside me shattered at once. My body went numb, my mind racing to catch up with what she had just said. A week or two. This wasn't some one-off mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This had been going on behind my back for days, maybe even weeks. Every late night, every secretive text, she had been lying to me the whole time. "A week or two?" I repeated, my voice cold, my fists clenching at my sides. "You've been lying to me for weeks, and now you want me to believe it didn't mean anything?" Nina collapsed onto the couch, her sobs echoing through the living room. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I don't know what I was thinking. I love you, Luke. I don't want to lose you." Her words rang hollow. The woman I thought I knew had betrayed me in the worst way possible. She had made me doubt myself, made me feel like I was the one going crazy, all while she was sneaking around with someone else. "You've already lost me," I said, my voice raw with pain. "There's nothing left to save here, Nina." I turned away, unable to look at her as the weight of her betrayal crushed me. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know how I was going to get through this. But I knew one thing for sure. Things would never be the same. I stood there, unable to move, staring at Nina as she sat hunched over on the couch, her body racked with sobs. Her words echoed in my head like a terrible drumbeat. A week or two. Everything about us, everything I thought was solid, had just crumbled in front of me. This wasn't some passing mistake. This wasn't some drunken lapse in judgment. She had been lying to me over and over again for weeks. I wanted to scream, to punch a hole through the wall, to do something, anything, that would make the anger burning inside me feel real. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching the woman I'd loved for 10 years break down in front of me, and I felt nothing but numbness. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. A week or two. Those weren't just numbers. They were days, hours, moments spent with someone else while I sat at home like a fool, trusting her, loving her, believing she was mine and mine alone. "Nina," I finally said, my voice cold, but steady. "Tell me the truth, all of it." She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red, her face streaked with tears. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I already told you," she stammered, her voice shaking. "It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." I shook my head, taking a step closer. No more excuses, no more half-truths. I want to know everything." Nina's lip quivered as fresh tears welled up in her eyes. "Luke, please. I've already told you enough. Please don't make me—" "How long have you been sleeping with him?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. Her eyes widened and she flinched as though I had struck her. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. "Nina," I said again, my anger rising. "How long?" She hesitated, wiping at her tears, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I told you it was maybe a week or two." "Maybe?" I repeated, my voice growing louder. "You don't even know how long it's been?" She winced at the harshness in my tone. "I didn't keep track, Luke. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped, my fists clenching. "You don't just accidentally sleep with someone, Nina. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose him." She sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I ruined everything, but I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Hurt me? Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything. Everything we had. Everything we were. It's gone, Nina." She shook her head desperately, standing up and taking a few steps toward me. "No, Luke. It's not gone. We can fix this. We can still fix us. I know I messed up, but I'm telling you the truth now. I'm being honest with you because I love you and I don't want to lose you." I stared at her, my mind reeling. She really thought we could fix this? She really thought that by confessing now, after weeks of lies, that we could just move past this? "You think you can just say sorry and we'll be fine?" I asked, my voice cold. "You've been lying to me for weeks. You've been sleeping with him while I've been here, waiting for you, trusting you, loving you. And now you want me to believe that you love me? That we can fix this?" Nina wiped at her tears, nodding. Yes, Luke, we can. I'll end it with him. I'll cut him off completely. I swear. Just give me another chance." I could feel the anger boiling inside me, ready to explode. "Another chance? Why? So you can lie to me again? So you can go behind my back and pretend like I don't matter?" "No, Luke, that's not it," she cried, stepping closer. "It was a mistake. I was confused. I didn't know what I was doing." "You didn't know what you were doing?" I yelled, the fury finally breaking free. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew it every time you stayed late, every time you lied about where you were, every time you went to him instead of coming home to me." Nina sobbed harder, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. "Please, Luke, please don't say that. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I'll do anything to fix this. Anything." I looked down at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes, the guilt etched into her face. For a split second, I almost believed her. I almost wanted to believe that we could fix this. But then I remembered the late nights, the jokes at the bar, the way she had laughed with him while I sat there feeling like a fool. "How long, Nina?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but still filled with anger. "How long did you think you could keep this up? How long were you going to lie to me?" She shook her head, her voice breaking. "I don't know. I didn't want it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me like a crushing blow. This wasn't just about her mistake. This was about the trust she had shattered. The foundation of our relationship, the love we had built over 10 years, it was all crumbling in front of me, and I didn't know how to stop it. "Was it worth it?" I asked quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Was any of this worth it?" Nina looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, shaking her head. "No, Luke. It wasn't worth it. It was the worst mistake I've ever made. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I stood there staring at her, feeling the weight of her words. She was pleading, desperate to hold on to what we had. But it was too late. The damage was done, and no amount of tears or apologies could change that. I turned away from her, my heart heavy with the finality of it all. "You already lost me, Nina," I said quietly. "You lost me the moment you decided to be with him." She let out a choked sob, collapsing onto the couch as her body shook with grief. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked toward the door, the weight of everything pressing down on me with each step. My mind raced, my heart breaking as I realized that the woman I thought I knew was gone. And so was everything we had. I drove for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring together as my mind struggled to process what had just happened. The pain was like nothing I had ever felt before. Sharp and relentless, cutting through every thought, every breath. Nina's confession replayed in my head over and over again, her words stabbing at me like knives. She had betrayed me, lied to me, for weeks, maybe longer. And the worst part was, I had wanted to believe her, to trust her. Even when everything inside me screamed that something was wrong, I had convinced myself that I was being paranoid. I pulled into a park, the kind of quiet spot I used to go to when I needed to clear my head. It was empty now, the streetlights casting long shadows over the empty benches and paths. I turned off the engine and sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The anger I had felt earlier had burned out, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. How could this have happened? How could everything I had believed in, everything I had fought to protect, be destroyed so easily? Nina and I had been together for 10 years, a decade of memories, of laughter, of love. And now it all felt like a lie. Was it all a lie? Had she ever really loved me? Or had I just been some convenient place for her to come back to when she was done playing around with someone else? I stared out the window, my chest tight with grief. I thought about the early days back when Nina and I first started dating. We had been inseparable, full of plans for the future, full of hope. I had trusted her completely, given her everything I had. But now, all I could think about was the way she had looked at me when she confessed, the way she had pleaded for forgiveness, as if that could somehow undo what she had done. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I didn't have to look to know it was Nina. She had already sent a few texts since I had stormed out, but I hadn't opened them. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face her again, not yet. I picked up the phone anyway, my thumb hovering over the screen, hesitating. Maybe I should read them. Maybe I should let her explain herself. But what more was there to say? She had lied, she had cheated. No amount of words could fix that. I tossed the phone back into the cup holder, leaning my head back against the seat with a heavy sigh. The silence of the park surrounded me, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like I was trapped in a cage of my own thoughts, and no matter how hard I tried to push them away, they kept circling back. Had I been too trusting? Too naive? I had always had that fear deep inside me, the fear that one day someone would break my heart again. I had been betrayed before, twice in my youth, and those scars had never fully healed. But I had believed that Nina was different, that she wouldn't hurt me like the others had. But she had. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to calm the storm in my head. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to feel like my entire life had been shattered. But how could I not? The woman I had spent a decade with had chosen someone else. She had looked me in the eye and lied over and over again, while sneaking off to be with another man. What was I supposed to do now? Forgive her? Pretend like this never happened? Could I even look at her the same way again? Could I ever trust her again? Number? The answer was there, staring me in the face. I couldn't. I couldn't go back to how things were. Not after this. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too raw. Nina had broken something between us that couldn't be repaired, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I sat there, letting the weight of it all settle in, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. I was drained, emotionally and physically. There was nothing left to fight for, no energy left to scream or cry. Just a numbness that filled every part of me, wrapping around my heart like a vice. I don't know how long I sat there in the car, staring out at the empty park. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed meaningless now. All I knew was that I needed to get away. Away from Nina, away from the house that no longer felt like home. I needed to clear my head to figure out what came next, because staying here, wallowing in this pain, wasn't going to help me. With a deep breath, I started the car again and pulled out of the parking lot, driving aimlessly through the quiet streets. My mind was a blur, but one thing was becoming clearer with each passing mile. I couldn't stay with her. As much as it hurt, as much as I wanted to cling to the hope that we could somehow fix this, I knew deep down that we were done. There was no going back. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had betrayed me in a way I couldn't forgive. And now, I had to let her go. I pulled into a cheap motel on the edge of town, parking in the back where the flickering neon sign buzzed overhead. The irony wasn't lost on me. A motel, just like the one where Oliver had seen them. But I wasn't here to reflect on that. I just needed somewhere to crash, somewhere that wasn't home. I checked in, barely registering the bored clerk's questions, and headed to my room. The bed was small, the room dimly lit. But I didn't care. I collapsed onto the mattress, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. Tomorrow, I'd figure things out. Tomorrow, I'd make the hard decisions. But tonight, I just needed to sleep. To escape the reality of what had happened, if only for a few hours. As I closed my eyes, the last thought that drifted through my mind was that I had been right all along. I was always afraid of being betrayed again, and this time, it had broken me. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the motel room, casting a dull glow across the unmade bed. I blinked awake, my body stiff and sore from a restless night of sleep. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The sterile walls and the faint buzzing of the neon sign outside made everything feel distant, almost unreal. But then, the events of the previous night came crashing back, and the weight of it all settled back onto my chest like a ton of bricks. I had left. Walked out on Nina, my wife, my best friend, the woman I had built my life with for 10 years. But she had shattered that life. The trust, the love, it was all gone. And now I had to face the reality of what came next. I dragged myself out of bed, wincing at the stiffness in my limbs, and headed into the tiny bathroom. The man in the mirror looked like a stranger. Dark circles under my eyes, unshaven, my face drawn with the weight of sleeplessness and heartbreak. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the haze that clung to me, but it didn't help. I knew what I had to do, but knowing didn't make it any easier. I packed my things, paid for the room, and got back into the car. The drive back home felt surreal. It was like watching my life from a distance, knowing I was heading back to confront the mess that had become my marriage. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and anger. I didn't know what Nina would say when I walked through that door. I didn't know if she would beg for forgiveness again, or if she would be waiting with excuses, more lies. But it didn't matter anymore. I had made my decision. When I pulled up to the house, the familiar sight of it felt foreign. It wasn't home anymore, just a place that held the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come, and stepped inside. Nina was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up as I walked in, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick with tension and sadness. "You didn't come home," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I was worried." I nodded, not bothering to explain where I had been. I needed time. She stood up, her hands wringing together nervously. "Luke, I've been thinking about everything. I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything, but I want to fix this. I don't want to lose you. Please, can we try to work through this?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. The sadness in her eyes was real, the guilt palpable. But so was the betrayal. I had thought about it all night, about the years we had spent together, about the life we had built. But no matter how much I wanted to go back, no matter how much I wanted to believe that we could fix it, I knew we couldn't. "I can't, Nina," I said quietly, my voice steady, but filled with the weight of the decision I had made. "We can't." Her face crumpled, and she took a step toward me. "No, Luke, please. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll never see him again. Just give me another chance, please." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, and felt the ache of that loss. But I also felt the resolve inside me. This wasn't just about her mistake. It was about the lies, the broken trust, the way she had made me doubt myself, made me feel like I was crazy. It was about the fact that she had chosen someone else over me, time and time again. "I'm not sure it's even about him anymore, Nina," I said, my voice quiet but firm. This isn't something you can just fix by quitting your job or cutting him off. It's about what's broken between us. And I don't think we can ever get that back. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks again. But we can try, Luke. We've been together for 10 years. Don't throw that all away because of my stupid mistake. I love you. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. I loved you too, Nina. But you didn't just make a mistake. You lied to me. You made me question everything. And I can't live like that anymore. I deserve better than that. She sobbed, sinking back onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. Please, don't leave me. I don't know what I'll do without you. The pain in her voice cut through me, but I forced myself to stand firm. I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that we could go back to the way things were. The trust between us was gone, and without trust, there was nothing left. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking as I turned away. But I'm leaving. I didn't look back as I walked up the stairs and began packing my things. Each item I placed in my bag felt like another piece of our life being dismantled, another memory left behind. I moved mechanically, my mind focused on the task, trying not to think about the woman sobbing downstairs, the life I was leaving behind. When I finished, I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the home I had built with her, the life we had shared. It should have felt sad, should have felt like a loss. But all I felt was relief. The weight of the lies, the constant doubt, the gnawing fear, it was all lifting, bit by bit. I headed downstairs, my bag slung over my shoulder. Nina looked up at me, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't meet her gaze. Goodbye, Nina, I said softly. She didn't respond, just cried silently as I walked out the door and into the fresh air. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze hit my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel weighed down by doubt. The pain was still there, the heartbreak, but there was something else too. Freedom. I put my bags in the trunk, started the car and pulled out of the driveway. As I drove away from the house, from the life I had known for so long, I felt a strange sense of hope rising inside me. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to take. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead.